Okay, well, it's time for the second session, and let me introduce you Cindy Ingram, for the next session, which is training.
So, hello, my name is Cindy Ingram. I work as a professor in the Haute École d'Ingénierie et d'Architecture of Fribourg. This session is about training, so the papers will discuss different developments in training in different contexts, whether formal educational context or informal training in different domains. So the first speaker is Maria Sisto, and her paper is a first step towards SG for MSD prevention, focus on environment transitions. So please. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Sisto, and I will talk about doing musculoskeletal disorders prevention using serious game and virtual reality. I will begin by explaining the context of this work. I will then talk about the solution we propose using serious game, virtual reality, and evolutive virtual environments. I will then present the current progress of the project. Finally, I will conclude this presentation with a short list of takeaway messages. So, first of all, what are musculoskeletal disorders or MSDs? MSDs are lesions to muscle, articulation, or nervous system due to repetitive work in an inappropriate position. It is one of the main work-related injuries in Western countries, with cost of hundreds of billions of euros per year in Europe. MSDs have been known for decades, and work environments have largely been improved by ergonomists. But the problem still exists. The question is why? We know the causes. We know the associated pathologies. Training sessions are provided to employers and to employees on how to organize the workplace and how to work to avoid the development of MSDs. The problem lies in the method used to teach this knowledge. In fact, the prevention training sessions are mostly given in large groups with one or very few sessions. This leads to difficult knowledge transmission and the training having little impact on the long term. Also, the training sessions are not very motivating, and unhealthy workers have difficulties to take potential future health consequences seriously. We add to this the social pressure, and we have an insight to understand why it is not effective. To address this issue, a consortium has been formed, including Swiss and French industrial partners and two academical actors, the UTBM and the HEARC. The idea is to improve already known MSD prevention techniques using two technologies to create an innovative solution with serious game and virtual reality. But more precisely, how do we want to use serious game and VR to achieve our goal? The idea is to imagine an entertaining activity that will prompt the user to do movements similar to the one he does in his real work. While playing the game, his movements and postures are analyzed via motion capture, and a warning is issued if he does something potentially harmful. The quality of the movement and posture is used to compute a score that will determine if the level is failed or not. We make the hypothesis that serious game and virtual reality will help us solve the main issue with MSD current prevention techniques, and this is how we will try to achieve this. First of all, VR allows to experiment safely different scenarios and repeat it as much as needed. Then, with the motion capture technology, we can track the movement and posture and notify the user if needed. Combining the two technologies, we can make a world where the user sees a realistic representation of his body and movements in a first-person view. This activates the brain more, especially the mirror neurons. And we hope this should form a better learning setup than the traditional one. Serious games help in two ways for the next problem. Of course, the game part makes the training more motivating, but also makes consequences more concrete, as the success of the game depends directly on the quality of the movement of hand posture. This brings an immediate consequences to a problem that usually takes years to appear. For the social pressure, the sessions are individual and anonymous. Thanks to that, first of all, the user is not ashamed of his failures, as nobody is here to witness them. Also, the user feels less uncomfortable in case of repeated failure, as no human coach is involved. There is no fear of disturbing or being a hindrance. Now that we have defined what we want to do and why, we have to think of how we will do it. And working with virtual reality, the question of virtual environments comes quickly and is not a detail for our application. We have two reasons to decide not to place the user in a replica of its work environment. The first one is that this will not be very motivating for the user. What's the point of using VR if it's to be in the exact same setup you are in everyday life? The second one is that we know that the environment we are in has an impact on emotions and mood. The workplace will carry some emotions, positive or negative, but we don't want them to influence the learning experience. That's why we choose to put the user in a calm and relaxing natural setup. But now that the user is successfully doing his exercises in the calm environment, how can we know that he will be able to transpose the acquired knowledge into his real workplace? We choose to make the environment slowly evolve around the user, transposing him from the calm virtual environment to a virtual environment resembling his real workplace. This is important. It is important for this transition to be progressive in order to not disturb the user in his task and avoid breaking the immersion. I will now talk about the current progress of this work because it is still in development. First, I will quickly disclose to you our technology's choices. We are using the HTC Vive for the virtual reality and the controllers. And we are developing on Unity with C# and using Blender for the 3D modeling. In order to test our concept of evolving environments and the potential attractivity of an assembly task we had imagined as base for our serious game, we decided to create a small demo. It contains a full loop of virtual environment evolution and an assembly task. The task is simple. The user has different robot body parts and has to assemble them. You can see them on the table here. To do the assembly, the user first has to put the limbs in the right position and then screw them into place. Some users' tests have already been conducted, validating this kind of interaction as interesting and the transition as being non-intrusive. I will now quickly conclude with two takeaways messages. First, the current MSD prevention techniques are not successful, but with modern tools such as serious game and virtual reality, we have a great potential to help solve this issue. So thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
We have time for a few questions.
So you were talking about pain in the shoulder. Is it something you assess with your game, the wrong position of the elbow? And if yes, this is a known problem that knowing the position of the shoulder and the hand, you can't really know where the elbow is located. What kind of solution do you think could solve this problem, this issue?
So we're planning in using a multi-Kinect installation and maybe enhance them with some image processing, but we want it to be non-invasive. We don't want to put any devices on the body, sensors, because this can influence the experience.
Thank you. About did you plan to test if it really worked on the environment, the real environment? Like you're trying to implement things you learn on games on reality, like in your real life work. All right?
Yeah.
Did you plan to test it like an experience study? If you want me to speak in French, maybe.
You can speak in French, yeah, it's
Alright.
the same for me.
Ça sera mieux, ça sera plus simple pour moi. Est-ce que vous avez prévu de faire des tests, simplement regarder si ça a vraiment une réelle utilité, dans le sens où si ça va vraiment changer le quotidien des gens, ou est-ce que vous ne l'avez pas encore prévu et c'est juste en état de bêta?
No, alors, we will make some user tests. That's for sure we're going to make them. But we have to do this on multiple persons on a long period of time, because you cannot change behavior in just one session. Maybe in 10, 20 sessions, yes, we could see some changes, but we are planning this in maybe 1 or 2 years, 3 years. In the time we have some complete product, a complete loop, and then we can deploy it into our industrial partners.
Thank you so much, Maria. Just for completing, answering your question, this is quite large project with around 15 institutes and between 2 to 3 years. And we schedule to have 3 user tests, 1 intern and 2 separate in both industries. But as Maria said, it's quite a long-term anyway experiment. We expect to have some real results not before 5 years.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Willy Bernhard from, let me guess, is it Fraunhofer Hochschule or nothing
No,
to
this
do
is
with this?
Swiss Distance University of Applied Science,
Oh.
Fernfachhochschule Schweiz.
Thank you. And so, collaborative game books for education and training. You have 10 minutes and then 3 minutes for questions.
Thanks. Yes. Okay. You see? Oh, okay. Yes, I'm professor at Swiss Distance University for Applied Science, and I want to show you collaborative game books for education and training. These kind of games are made for teachers that they can have their own learning content, pack it into a serious game. So, what is a collaborative game book? It's a digital interactive text-based story which creates the whole gaming environment into your brain. The learner actually has to do some actions and can influence the whole story. And he also meets other learners in online rooms for some certain tasks, which are most of the time asynchronous. This is like like you can imagine how it works. You read this text in fiction, where educational content is in it, and you create in your brain, you create the whole environment. That's the same principle like if you read a book or if you look at a movie about the same thing. In the most cases, the book is better than the movie because your brain is better in creating such environments based on stories. I will show you some smart example how that looks like. I click here. Okay. Is this? Yeah, restart. Okay. So you can use it also. It's on internet. It's just a small demo example. So the first day you put in your name. Let's say I'm Peter. Oh, can I? Yes. Yeah. I don't see it here. Okay, I have to do some interaction. Go ahead. No? Can I? Where? Ah, here. Okay, I see here. Okay. So you have to have the task to fulfill, like here, take care of 4 children. You start at 2 o'clock and you have to end at 4 o'clock. And if you can do that, you are successful. Go ahead. So you are invited by your neighbors for babysitting. You are in their house with 4 girls, each 5 years old. Their parents just left the house. So just after the kids have seen a nice birthday cake on the table in the middle of the room and are right away to catch it. What are you doing now? First, you try to hold them away from the cake. You scream, shout them, and tell them to stop. Or you suddenly take the cake away and immediately flee into the kitchen. So this is your thinking action, what you have to do. Let's say I take the first one. You could catch 2 kids holding them in your left and right hand, but the rest of the kids are still on the way to the cake. Even you run behind them, still holding 2 kids. You run around the table and the kids do the same. No chance to get off it. You realize that's not a good idea. You have left 1 hour. So you come to the same, actions with a different story. You still try the same challenging situation. What are you doing now? So you learned this first did not work. So I take this one, and the story goes away. I don't read everything, but then you see, you come into the story, and you have always the possibility to influence the story to make your decision. So it explains how it works. And that is the end. It's now 6 o'clock. And you should finish at 4 o'clock. Peter, you could be better. You had more than 2 hours to satisfy the kids. Try it once again. You end up here. So you see, you have responsive things. What you do has an influence on the whole story. Can I go back to the... Yeah, just click it away. Okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Why should you use collaborative game books? First, they are easy to create, and they run on any device, on your smartphone, an iPad, or whatever. It's interactive and it's collaborative because you have certain tasks which you have to fulfill with other students. And you can create experience like we have seen here, or provide learning or practice training. So just to tell stories is not enough for education. So you need a guided thing what you can do if you want to pack in your own educational content. So what you need is story elements and playful ideas. You need educational content and a didactic model. You need collaboration rooms and a technical environment. Show you how it works. This is a first story block. I prepared templates as story blocks. So you have the story block where you have some content of story in it, and you have the decisions, and based on the decisions you see, you have a different feedback. So here the only way to go out to this story block is to go to the blue one. I created 6 story blocks, which is enough for making a whole course. So I've done a course, a 6-month course with 150 lessons, completely with those 6 blocks is enough diversity. The story had about 100 blocks. So you see, you have alternative possibilities, you have collaborative things, you have compositional things. So in order to create what you need. The adaptive model is based on the revision of Bloom's taxonomy. So the story challenge is actually your knowledge you want to put in. On the left side, you can say, okay, I want to have factual knowledge or conceptual or procedural. And the decision you do is the cognitive part. So you can say, do I want to have just to remember something or to understand or to apply? And this is how you create your educational content into these story blocks. This is the technical environment. It's Squiffy, open source software. On the left side, you have the text and a simple markup language that you guide, that you can make your stories also interactive and what if and things like that. You can also put in JavaScript things, but also markup language things. On the right on the right side, you can check it. And if it runs, you can export it to HTML and then pack it onto your learning management platform or whatever. So this is my message to you. Did you ever want to create a fascinating educational game with your own content? So you could use a game book. It's only limited by your creativity. The technical thing is very small. Yes, if I can help, I will do. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm very talkative. Thank you so much for your speech. During your speech, you actually said that it's fairly easy to make the story, but we are doing the same thing at the ARC, and we have some issues with the scenario, and most of the time it's very tricky to make something very consistent, because depending on the bad choice, then you will have consequences, and then you cannot simply come back to the initial.
Yeah, what here really helps is that you have those story elements. What you do is you choose the story element and you pack it side by side. So you have a chain of those story blocks. So this is a complexity you can handle, and is a lot of diversity for the learner. He does not know which story block he will see. So for him, everything is new. Is challenging, yes. But what you can do is to separate the story from the content. So the story can be made by a storyteller, and the content by the teacher, and then you make that together. For example, our story we have made for this 6-month course is a story where the student has to learn how to do the master thesis. And in the story, he runs from location to location, from Paris to London to Dubai, and once around the world, like Jules Verne's 80 Days. And then he travels, for example, to London, and he meets an expert for exactly that issue which the story block handles. For example, he has to deal about literacy. He goes to this expert in London, and the expert asks him some questions. And depending on the answer, he gives you tips and hints and advices and things to read in order to success. Yeah.
Thank you for the speech. Could you just explain us a bit more how the students they collaborate to create the game? Maybe I misunderstood this part.
There is collaboration block, so you come into a collaboration block, which is an online room, like a Padlet.com. Maybe you know a Padlet. And there is a certain task which is part of the story. For example, in my course, the master thesis, they have to put the name of their thesis, and they have to give a feedback to all the students which are also in their room, which are visited the room. So kind of peer feedback. Yes. And other rooms have other tasks for the students. And you as a teacher, you see what they do there. So you have to discuss that too. Yeah.
Thank you. So we played with a game book in the context of a training. And the difference I noticed with your demo is we could see the progressive, the result, the score. We could see it, we could see it not just at the end, but also throughout the answering of questions, which could help you know that you're going in a bad direction. So what do you think of this?
Actually, I didn't have time to show that. What I have, you have also in the game book a menu system. So you hit on a menu, and then you have a help function, and you have also a function where you can see how you proceed, and you can see how other students proceeded. Because the goal of the game is, for these 20 students, they all run once around the world, and it takes time, yes? And you win if you're the first. And you see how many days you are in front or behind of each other. And also it needs money. You have you have certain money where you have to take cars or trains and things like that, or you have to pay expenses. And if you don't have money, enough money, you have to go to certain activities where you have to do some collaboration work with others. Then you get some more money, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Pardon. So our next speaker is Annalisa Martin-Niedeken, and she will present a paper on training in fitness environments.
Everybody, as you see, I brought someone else with me. So I am Anna Martin. I am from the Zurich University of the Arts. I'm a sports scientist working in game research for the last couple of years.
Hello, I'm Ralf Mauerhofer. I'm working in game design and game development, and I work at Cobalt Games. And for the last years, I really enjoyed doing sports, all different kinds of sports. So there is our point. At the beginning, we like to show you what happens if a game-interested sports scientist meets a sport-interested game designer or game developer. We start the project with a little video where we can show our actual state of the project, and then we'll go into detail afterwards.
very beginning of the project, there were a lot of theories and approaches which we were interested in. And we would say the core theory, beside sports scientific and beside game research-driven approaches, was always flow. Flow is described as a feeling of being totally absorbed within fulfilling an activity, such as playing a game, for example. Beside fulfilling the activity and being absorbed, you will also experience enjoyment and fun while doing so. To get into the flow zone, it is very important that the skills which are required to fulfill a task and your actual skills are balanced and matched with each other. Otherwise, you won't get into the flow. Sinclair et al. Extended this rather mental model of flow, and they say when playing an EXA game, you have to think about the body as well, because you have the mental state and you have the body state while interacting with a physically challenging game. So it is very important that an EXA game neither over-challenge nor under-challenge you while playing, on the mental as well also as on the bodily level. So this was our main starting position for the R&D project, and we wanted to develop a fitness game environment which dynamically adjusts its difficulty level in order to provide a dual flow experience for various player and sports types. The targeting group were children in the age of 10 to 14, and we involved the targeting group into our iterative design process. We focused on not only the game scenario, no, we also focused on the development of specifically designed full body motion controller, which you can see on the left. Because we know, also from the theory, that the controller can be a strong predictor for or against flow and dual flow experience. So, to contrast our development, we further implemented Plunder Planet with the commercially available gesture-based Kinect sensor, which allows for a higher freedom of movement, while our full body motion controller challenged the player coordinatively and cognitively. So let's have a look what happens inside the game scenario.
These requirements were also very important in the visual part of the game. So as we heard before about the talk about Nevermind, where the game and the art, this intersection of the circles, it's for the immersion of the game, for the flow, it's exactly the same here. So if you look at this screen about the game, you have really almost every element in the level, in the environment supports the moving forward, indirectly supports the flow. So you have these speed lines on the floor, you have a channel you drive in it. The objects beside who go past you are slim and high, so they have these fast movement effects. And also particle effects are used for trail renderings, like to support the speed. And therefore you can't see it in the still image, but the animation of the player character or the animation of the ship is really important to support the movements you do in the room. On the other hand, and the technical part, it was, in order to be adaptive in every way, the whole track has to be generated dynamically on runtime, and even the mesh of the track below, the slopes and the stuff like that is generated in real time in order to adapt to the player's skill or the player's level. There you see the three main parts in the three images above we can adapt to. It's on the left you have the difficulty of one obstacle, which parts you can move through the obstacle. So this is a cognitive challenge. It's as well as a little physical and mental challenge. In the middle, you have the frequency. It depends how often you have an obstacle to avoid. This is purely a physical task. The faster they arrive, the faster you have to move. And the part on the right the slopes and how far you can see, because if there are more slopes and it goes up and down, this is a mental challenge to make the game feel difficult. And these options, they adapt based on the player's input. There you have the biofeedback. We have the heart rate that is measured for the physical response of the player, and according to how often the player makes mistakes or runs into obstacles, we can balance the difficulty level of the mental and cognitive Herausforderung. Challenge, yeah. And we have also for trainers a UI where you can also for research parts where you can change these values live while playing and experience this.
Yeah, and currently we conducted a couple of evaluations or small studies with this prototype. So just to let you know how that might look like, here you can see some scenes from the laboratory where we already conducted a feasibility study which proved the feasibility of the adaptive game scenario, and we already proved the attractiveness and the effectiveness of the game. We compared the different impacts of controller devices on the spatial and the game experience of our testing subjects, and yeah, hopefully we will continue with a lot of other interesting research topics soon, maybe to compare the training effects of a 12-week intervention with Plunder Planet to a traditional comparable gym exercise. That would be very interesting. And based on the findings, we currently further developed our controller, which you can see on the right side. So it's not of wood anymore, it's a bit more looking like a product right now and working like a product. So, and in future work, we want to further focus on exploring and experimenting with the controller and the body as adaptive approach for the gameplay. So, for example, we want to vary the positions of the buttons depending on the player's heart rate or in-game performance. And we want to vary with, for example, body movements, which you are allowed to use in order to navigate the virtual ship. And also on the in-game scenario, we want to further explore how to work and design adaptive game mechanics.
And there comes also the visual part, where we like to research and experiment with atmosphere, different level type, also the user-computer interaction. You have an example of a little lead bot in front of the ship there to guarantee the player much faster feedback of his position than the ship that is moving flow supportive. And we have also great ideas about multiplayer possibility and challenge and competitive settings. So we come to the end of our presentation, and as a take-home message, we'd like to share that the experience about working, coming from two really different fields, from the design and the natural sciences. Together we had really interesting moments where, oh, we have this theory, it's called like that, and oh, this theory is called like that, but it's essentially the same. How can we combine it? And we have really a lot of things in this project now that has its fundamentals in different areas of research, and I'd like to motivate you to do that, to look beyond your borders of your own topic and collaborate. Thank you.
Thanks for the great talk. It looks like just an amazing product. I'm curious if you guys can share anything with us about the differences you might have observed in terms of the different controller schemes, the motion, and maybe not just in terms of enjoyment, engagement, maybe it differs by age, something.
Mm-hmm. So just to hold it short, we can talk about afterwards for hours, I guess, but the main findings we had is that, for example, children with former sports experience and former playing experience, they enjoyed the Kinect very much. We assume because they already have a very good feeling of their own body, because they are trained, they are doing sport, they are used to, compared to the more couch potato-oriented targeting subjects, they loved to be guided. Orientation points and yeah, the buttons which could give them a haptic feedback as well were very important. So yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
We have 3 more minutes for questions.
Thank you. Have you tried different size of screens? Because we saw small screens in the development room, and we saw that one of the boy with the hardware buttons has always to watch back to get to the buttons. How does it change the interaction when the screen is huge, or maybe like with a beamer or like here? Do you have any insight about it?
It's really, as a player, it's a really different experience. For the buttons, the orientation, one little thing that is really important is how close you stand to the screen and how far the buttons are. So moving about 10 centimeters has a really a huge impact about your experience as a player. And for the screen size, it's also it doesn't really matter if at some point of size, if it goes bigger, as long as you see the area you have to interact with. So this is I think there are really big differences about this.
And maybe concerning the button situation, we also asked the children whether they felt disturbed by having to sometimes look back, especially in the beginning when they all still learned how to interact with the device. But none of them really recognized it directly. Maybe indirect, but none of them really said, yeah, that disturbed me, for example. So, but in future, we think about having buttons which are enlightened, so you have a better peripheral visual aspect as well. Yeah.
And I could add to this point, for the game experience, there are also ideas of using the space in between to shape it like the ship in game or stuff like that, so that the space in between is not empty space, is not void, is part of the experience you're in it. So this would help this guidance as well.
You're measuring heart rate through a polar heart rate measure. How did you make the choice? We know today that we can wear watches that gives you the heart rate. So you still keep on the heart rate of polar, or you're planning something else?
I think Polar was easy to have access to the values, because we had to develop an app ourselves in order to combine the physical values directly into the game engine. So that was only the starting point. But we know about other possibilities, for example, with heart rate variability, which might be very interesting. We decided against things like skin conductance and EEG because we are in a movement-based setting and all these values won't be valid and reliable anymore when you move. So does this answer your question? Partial? What did I miss?
The watches we use in sport they are okay. There is no problem wearing it, and it's really easy. And you don't have to take your clothes out and put your polar, and so that was the point.
You mean it's too difficult to just start putting on sensor and stuff?
More things to do before you start playing.
Sorry, I didn't.
It's more things to do. I mean, you have to take and put a polar on your skin. And
that's
so on.
right. That's right. So. Thank you.
recursive amplified embodiment, and I call upon Sydney Beauvais from EPF.
Vous aviez envoyé l'avion à l'avance?
Ouais, j'avais envoyé. J'avais envoyé un lien pour un drive. Hier midi, ouais. Sinon je l'ai sur la base position. Okay, thank you. So I'm Sydney. I'm currently a research assistant at EPFL, and what I'm presenting to you is, roughly speaking, my master thesis. So first of all, I would like to apologize for this rather long and academic title, which I will break down for you right now. So self-haptic consistency means simply that when I have an avatar in a virtual environment, when I touch one of my body parts, I want the avatar to show the same contact. Amplified embodiment, on the other hand, means that when I move outwards, I don't want the movement to look exactly the same, but I want the avatar to do more ample movement, bigger movements. For this to work, obviously we need some kind of motion capture system, and ideally also a head-mounted display, because what's the point in distorting the movement of your avatar if you have your physical hand in front of you to remind you what your actual motion was. But then you might ask, why should we care about movement distortion? Well, of course it has some interesting questions about virtual reality. How do we react to a body that has distorted movements? How we relate to such a body in a virtual environment. But one of the main interesting concerns we have, something we could help with, is stroke rehabilitation. So the process of stroke rehabilitation is rather long and tedious. It involves repeated movement with a paralyzed limb, and in this regard, motivation is key, and serious games can already help, as was presented to you earlier this morning by MindMaze team. They have some technology in order to make the process more involving, and we believe that our technology will be helping even more in this regard. So, not the first time you see this graph, I guess. I would like to apologize to those who are familiar to this type of graph for my rather unethical and unusual use of it, but I hope it will make my point. So you have the ability and the challenge, as explained earlier, and the flow, that would be the comfort zone, what you are used to in everyday life. The thing is, when you got a stroke, your abilities are pretty low. So what you expect is some kind of task that presents a low challenge. And the issue is that for you to get better, you need the task to be quite hard. And so this gap between what you expect and what you experience during the training is what actually causes anxiety at first, and then leads to demotivation. So our technology of amplifying movements will help artificially fill that gap, at least temporarily, and help you continue with the training and perform better over time. So I hope I have convinced you that movement distortion is interesting. Now let's do a tiny bit of geometry, but it will be very simple. If I want to represent a point in space, let's say the position of my hand, the easiest way is to use basic coordinate system, x, y, z coordinates. But that's not the wisest thing to do in our case. Let's say you have something surrounding that hand, let's say some geometry, for instance, a table. Then what we can do is sample some points on that geometry and describe the position P as its position relative to those points on the table. so that if in my virtual environment the table is moving up and down, for instance, my hand won't sink into the table, but really stay on top of it. Now, instead of a table, what you could do, so that's basic stuff. If you want to discuss that, I'm pleased to do so. And now, if you, instead of taking the table, you take your own body, we get quite a lot of interesting properties, one of which is that we have successfully represented self-contact. For instance, in this case, if I hold my hand in front of my chest, then one of those vectors here, V, will be 0, which means we have detected a self-contact, and the avatar will do so as well, because it will have a 0 vector with respect to its own chest. So that's one of the key properties we are looking for. We want the whole experience to make sense, and you being able to touch yourself. And on top of that, what we added is this deformation of the posture, this movement distortion. And based on what I explained, what I just explained you, the answer in order to distort the movement is fairly simple. If you, user, have your hand at some location, what we can do is simply alter the vectors describing the position of your hand, and we get an avatar here that has some the hand at some different location. So what does this look like in reality, which is not that real? For instance, here, the subject had to reach from a target that was on the leg to a target that was in the air in the virtual environment. And as you can see, the required distance to get the avatar to the correct position is halved. So the hand is in mid-air, and what the person sees in the helmet is the virtual avatar already has reached the target. So in order for you to see how it looks in action, we have a small video. So at first, no distortion at all is applied so that you get a feeling as to how it reacts. And then we apply an amplification. In this case, it's a doubling distortion. And as you can see, the movements of the avatar are indeed augmented and bigger, amplified. What we can also do, instead of applying some amplification, we can apply movement diminution. So in this case, we halve the movement, which means that in order for the avatar to cover a certain distance, I have to travel twice as far, which has other applications, not in stroke rehabilitation, but maybe in sports training. So about the next step, so this is the technology that we have developed. And what we are currently doing is we are trying to understand, as I said, what kind of impact it has with the whole virtual reality experience. How do you react? Also, how far we can go with the distortion without you noticing it, or without it breaking completely your virtual reality experience. And of course, in the long run, that's what we already discussed previously. We'll have to understand exactly how this can help, and what kind of parameters we have to include for the task to be meaningful in the context of stroke rehabilitation, or in any other type of training application. And we also would like to issue some general guidelines, not only for stroke rehabilitation-oriented serious games, but really any kind of VR applications. Speaking of guidelines, we already have some preliminary results, so I can share some information with you. What we tend to find out is that self-haptic, of course, is important, but we have data to underline that. And the simple fact that it helps increasing immersion in the virtual environment should be meaningful to most of you, because it means that it leaves you more freedom to alter other factors, such as how hard it is, the challenge that is posed by some task, for instance, a physical one. yeah, you can alter other factors in order to attain the goal you want to with your serious game or with really any training application. So thank you. If you have any questions, feel free.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the frustration people might have when they are doing a rehabilitation and in the game they see that they can do something really good, and in real life there is nothing more in like a few days, because I think rehabilitation takes a long time to go through. And when you see you avatar can do something you can't do in real life, that may be a frustration for the person.
Yes, so it might be. As I said, we're in the early stages, and I'm nothing. I'm not an expert about rehabilitation, but those are effects that we can think about. There might be other type of effects. For instance, some neuroscientists we discussed this with suggested that the fact that seeing yourself doing bigger movements could have a beneficial effect with mirror neurons. So as we discussed before, it's a matter of balancing the negative effects of you being able to do more than what you know you can with the potential helpful effect you have on the training.
Thank you. Are you working only on amplifying simple movement, like for example just arms, or are you working on also on coordinating complex movement? For example, if you amplify legs movement, the whole body must go fast, and also arms have to follow the same rhythm. Are you working on simple movement or complex movement?
So currently we are only working on simple movement because of the way we have implemented the distortion. But we could imagine something where, as you said, we amplify maybe the speed at which you're walking or something like that. But currently we are only amplifying the movement with respect to your body and not with respect to the environment.
Okay, so now it is the time for the round table. So all the speakers of this session, could you please come and join us for the round table, and the speakers of the next session as well. That is the session on business, right? And the previous one? Oh, okay. So the same ones that were in the previous, yeah, okay. Okay. So the theme of this roundtable is basically is training and overrated the use of gamification in training an overrated practice, or does it really have an added value? So will we have a microphone, a wireless microphone? Can I? Test. So I prepared a set of questions. And of course, it is open to other questions. So based on the experience of some large corporations, gamification has proven to be useful, to have some added values. Nevertheless, it is still considered by some people as overrated, as superfluous to training. So what are the reasons behind this position? What is your position with respect to this subject? Is there enough evidence in the literature about the positive impact of gamification in employee training? And do you have a personal experience with the application of gamification to business context? And last but not least, should gamification then be considered as a nice to have training practice, or is it really essential? Does it have a real added value? The floor is yours.
Yeah?
Okay, yeah. Interesting question about do you have enough literature about using games for education, for example? When I made my game book, a lot of questions came like, do they learn better with the game book or not? And this is very difficult a very difficult question, because is it the goal to learn better when you have a serious games, or is just you learn it like before, but you have fun? Yeah. So that's the problem when I see. I have no question about do they learn better when you use serious games. Maybe anybody of you have an answer for that.
Perhaps do they participate more because the context is more fun?
Yeah, actually, they are motivated. They are more motivated to learn, but maybe it takes longer to learn because they make more. But the effect, when you measure effects, you want to have the quality. You measure the quality. Do they learn better? Do they know more, for example? And I think nobody measures. Do they have more fun when learning? Maybe you learn not better, but you have more fun. Which one is better?
I think it's coming to the attention you get. My personal feeling, I don't rely on lots of literature or things like that, but the main draws I've seen in serious gaming is like mostly people like focus on the seriousness of what the end goal is, and they forget about the games. And making a game that is attractive is already a good challenge. We see that if you take just entertainment, you see the number of games that is like coming on the market, video games or other type of game, board games or whatever. And it's already difficult to make something that is getting the attention of the people which are playing. And a serious game is like adding like another constraint on top of it, because it's not just for pure fun, but you have also like the guy has to come back from the game with something, meaning like physical activity or like knowledge or like maybe train some different skills. Usually like my usual thing is like when you present a serious game, like it's already so much difficult to make a good game. That's a game that people want to play, and it's even more difficult for a serious game. Or, of course, you can attach the people to the game, like in classroom, and say you have to play this game. But then you lose the tricks and the benefit of a serious game, which means like people will learn something because their attention is on the game. So my recommendation is like when you making serious game, if you want something out of the game, think of the game first. Because if people don't want to play or won't play, or like it's also linked to the amount of content you will be able to provide into the game, you need to have something that is pertinent, that is interesting, because there's nothing worse than playing a boring serious game, because I prefer to have a boring textbook with just like a list of things that I have to learn by heart, but, instead of playing something that it's like taking a lot of narrative things which are boring just to get to something that I could have learned in 5 minutes by looking to a list.
So it shouldn't go against its purpose. Its purpose is to motivate learning. So maybe you had something to... was the same thing.
I also would like to add that in my opinion it's not exclusive, so it's another way of learning stuff. So we have different media types to learn something, and we have really different approaches to learn something as people. So I think for really visual people who learn in a story, in an environment, and connect things, a serious game is, or should, I think it's really an improvement. But there are also like people they learn more from learn by heart or stuff like that, or make matrices of stuff and connect them like this. So probably there a serious game is not an ideal tool to support learning. So it's not exclusive. So it's another option to learn things.
Here we are speaking about learning, but not training, and not training, physical training. So I want to add something about physical training, especially about my part, that was prevention of musculoskeletal disorders. I think now people, they don't do the exercise. That's not like they do them and they don't do them, they're good or that they're bored. The thing is, they just don't do it because yeah, they don't see the point, or they're bored, or yeah, I don't know. It's not very attractive. It's like when you go to the physiotherapist and you make 10 sessions, and he say, well, when you go home, you have to do all those exercises at home, and you don't do it. I don't do it. I know I should, but you do it for 1 week, 2 weeks, and you have to do it for 6 months, and you don't do it because, yeah, it's not attractive. So I think for this, a serious game, the game concept really adds attractiveness to the thing you want to do.
So like one of my early advisors used to say, you show them the carrot. You remember the metaphor? So any experience with training in business contexts? Like when they use training, gamification in training employees to acquire a certain skill?
We work on a project, it's called Serious Moral Game. It trains the awareness of moral in a banking financial context. So this is kind of probably exactly that point. And there it's what was said before, it's connected to an environment where you say the people, they have to play it. It's not the game about they engage themselves. And there it really works well with these people. They like to play the game because for them it's a different way to approach this thematic. So they're not afraid of it or something like that. We imagined that at first, but it's really engaging, and they dive into the material like this, like they didn't have with their paper with the rules of engagement on it. So it really works, but the test case is really limited, so we have this 40 participants, and some of them are still students, not practicing it in the real world yet, so we don't have really significant data yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not really a matter of acquire professional skills, but on campus EPFL we had some, it's really gamification and nothing about serious games, but it was about learning environmentally friendly habits, and we had a website on which we could report if we did some effort on not printing too many pages, shutting off the light when we exited some rooms, and since I was only a participant, I don't have data on how well this affected the whole behavior, for instance, the electricity consumption of the campus. But it had some popularity, and many people were working together. You could form teams, they compete against each other, so it was a thing.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting aspect about this gamification context, because the task is something, but if you have, like, for example, for training, what is important is that you repeat the stuff every day, or things like that, and it's the same for environment habit or for training habits. And there's like the gamification is very important because it's the way you reward, like you were saying the carrot, that if you got a reward system or like some collection aspect or something that is like, we are creature of habits and we like to collect things, we need to gain reward, and the social aspect also is very important. So we can get something which is what I was saying before, and what you are implying when you are saying that it's not that the task itself is, it's what you gain from it. And you can get motivation for this mean, and the meta gameplay and the reward system is a key aspect to take in.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think everyone's kind of said this, you really have to respect play, like what it means to play. And a couple things come to mind when I hear you all talk. One is that there's a very famous board game producer named Bruno Faiduti, and he had an essay on why he hates educational games, and one of the key theses behind it, and I make educational games, so it's important for me to know, is that when you play educational games with kids, when a teacher presents it, they look at it and they know exactly what it is. It's a lie. And they look at you and they think you're a cheater. You're trying to cheat me into learning and by play. And that doesn't work, because kids know what play feels like. And so what comes to mind when I hear when I hear you guys talk is a project that was done by somebody named Jeff Watson at USC, and the name of the project escapes me right now. Come up to me later when I have a chance to Google it. But he basically had a project where he was tasked with bringing together different students within the film school. So at USC, they have a film school, and they have different departments. They have the animation department, the director department, the writing department. He created a game that was a secret game that people had to play completely voluntarily. The way that it was played was you took cards and you used those cards to create film productions. It was not part of your classwork. The cards were collected in a room, which was like, like Harry Potter style, like platform 9 3/4. Like, it didn't exist officially. It was something that people had to voluntarily participate in. And I think as game designers, when we're trying to get people to learn something with our games, they need to come to the game and it should feel like it's truly play, like it's a truly voluntary experience that they have their own stake in. And to that extent, when we do that, then indeed we're opening up the door to a certain subset of people. It's not going to be the thing that's for everybody. We're just designing tools to make our toolbox even bigger so we can reach more people than we could have in the past. That's the way I see things.
Any more interventions from the speakers?
Yes, maybe this aspect of voluntariness, this is very important, I think. I also had a class when I made this game book, and one student said, I never play games, so I don't want to do that. So I had to give all those documents and stuff like that for reading, which was really boring, but these people wanted to do that. So I think the serious games are just an option.
True.
Which have to be voluntary. This is my thinking at the moment, so there is no other solution for me.
So it's another style, like you were saying. It's another kind of practice. It doesn't need to be universally accepted.
There's one thing also, I think is kind of a misconception, because like when you ask people to play a game, like I'm from Norwegen, I'm trying to convert like a lot of people around me, so I play at family dinners or friends' place. And usually, like I see people say, "Oh no, I don't want to play games. It's for kids. Like I don't care," and stuff like that. And when you say, "Come on," you have to be like, they need to make the first step. But if they can pass explaining the rules and stuff, it's amazing how many people say they hate games. And when you present the right game at the right place, not all gameplay will fit everybody. But I think games are like literature. Like a lot of people don't read and they say, "Oh, books are not interesting." But if you present them the right book for themselves, they will get hooked by it. And I think games is really the same. We always see people who say, "Oh, I don't play at all," and it's wrong. And we've seen the last decade like a really big change. Like for example, the Wii coming to for the old people who start playing. We can see also mobile games really change habits. A lot of people never play at all, and they spend like thousands of hours on Candy Crush, for example. Unfortunately, that was not really a lot of reward, but I think there's a misconception about like a lot of people would be enjoying games if they know how to sing, and we need to find some subtle introduction, because forcing them is the most demotivating step you can take.
I can add a fun fact. It also reconnects to a question about elderly people playing games. We had an exhibition where a group of elderly people came and they looked at young people playing our game Plunder Planet, like they hop, skip, and jump and stuff like that. And then the young group went away, and we engaged them, said, "Hey, do you want to play Plunder?" "Oh no," and they made a step back. One had the courage to get into it. And he played almost a quarter an hour Plunder Planet, and he almost overdid himself. So it was almost dangerous because he really got engaged in the game, and he because we can connect the Kinect, that the movements can be a bit slower to guide the game. So he was really into the game, and he was really surprised by himself that this was that easy to dive into the game. So yeah, it's one person. It's like more like a fun factor.
So perhaps there's in the audience someone who would like to give his opinion or.
Just to talk about serious game in education, like I'm interested in topics right now because I find it really interesting. But I think that gamification or serious game in education has to be more supportive for the education than really a mean to educate someone. Like you can do a serious game just to show like a situation, a real situation of something you will learn during a lesson, or just to make people in realistic scenes of everyday life. Like if you learn something about comptability, you can make a serious game about it and make it like a real scene of the educational process you did before.
Actually, if I get it well, this is so true in the sense that we went to a gaming a training, a course for gamification in learning, and that's the one message he gave us. If we were to apply a serious game, it has to be complemented with a synthesis of what we've learned with the traditional ways of teaching. It should not be used on its own.
Thank you. I have two challenging questions. It's open question. I don't know if we can answer them. The first one is that we are talking about using gamification, serious game, to help for training and learning. This assumption means that we have like a postulate that learning is not funny by itself. And I don't know, is it learning something new? It's not, cannot be happy by itself, cannot be funny by itself. The fact that we are happy to know something, to discover something. So we need like a modality or a way to make it less boring or painful or whatever. So I don't know. Is it a question of modality, or is it a question that we ask people to learn something that they are not interested in, or the subject is not good, etc.? This is the first question. The second question is mainly because the topic of the round table was for training for employee. And my question is, I know that it's not the only objective, but one of the objectives of learning is to prepare people for work. So if you ask someone to learn, suppose for example that we take accounting or finance, and he learned all his life by playing, and then we ask him to spend 8 hours in a boring office to do his job. Is it the right way to do it? So this is my question. Is it necessary to have gamification? Is it possible to invent a way that learning becomes funny by itself? And the second question is, are there any side effect by making everything funny, and then at what point we ask them to work, to be productive with stress, etc., etc.?
Do you have? I do have an answer, but maybe you could start. So regarding the first question, the topic has to be interesting in some way for the people to decide to learn this topic compared to something else. But there's also the way of how we teach this topic. And this is where teachers also, because it's also the profession of many of us, comes into play. How do we make this topic interesting? And gamification should be a means or one alternative to do it. But if you have the most interesting topic, but you don't have, it's not presented in the best way possible, then learning, the objective of learning might not be reached. So there's the topic, but there's also how we present it as people form to deliver some learning.
And there's also, I think, the other part of exactly this. For most people, if they learn something and it is fun, they do it because voluntary, because they like it, they don't consider it learning. So it begins to be learning when it begins to be hard work. So I think this, we can also see this a lot in games, also in entertaining games, in big public games. There you really learn a bunch of stuff. Much of it you can't use in the real world, but you learn names of items and cities and worlds and geographic stuff. It's absolutely immense what you learn, and it's not considered learning. Because I know the Formula 1 track Monza yeah, I can drive it with blinded eyes probably, but for me it was not learning this track, because it was fun, it was a game, so it's not learning. And I think this is also a view of, we had it before, this voluntary thing that a player wants to play the game, that someone wants to learn something, then it's much more easier, but often not considered learning. So.
Yes, just before. I have experience in about the question, do you have something to learn which you are not interested in? My experience, for example, this is the mathematics. Students don't like mathematics. So that's in the 2 days trend, yes. And for years we teach mathematics with mathematicians. Yes, they teach them and students don't like. And I asked them, why do you always use mathematicians? They are so boring when they teaching that. And say, okay, I will create you a course. I'm an engineer. I will create you a course because I think mathematics can be very exciting. And it's if you have storytelling behind, or game books, I made it with game books, then people could like it. And then I made that course for students, which was the last chance for a mathematician course. Yes, because the baddest students they had. And I made this course with storytelling in interactive game books, and they liked that. And they were solving this task in mathematician problems and things like that very easy and a very funful way. And in this way, it worked, I would say. Even they did not like mathematics.
This is actually exactly what I was going to say. We learn best when the thing that we're learning seems like it's a tool. We as humans, we want to conquer the world. We need to learn things that are tools. And when it feels like it's a tool, that it helps us, then we learn better. So whether you do that through a game or through just being a better educator, I think that there's a lot of value in that. Another thing I just add, from a personal standpoint, I personally attribute a lot of the successes I had when I was in school, in retrospect, to the fact that I conceptualized school as a game. There's a way in which school fits with what a game is. There are certain rules that you have to abide by or not abide by. There are certain boundaries that you can push, and you can see what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. There's, especially when you get into higher education, there's an extent to which you're being asked to figure out what the rules of the game are. A teacher gives you a rubric, and you're trying to, and when you can, yes. And I think if teachers are, exactly. So I think if teachers conceptualize their job like that, like inducting somebody within a game, then I think that could also be beneficial to people.
So thank you. I think it's the end of the session, but to answer the second question, if I may, and I think it would be a nice closure. We live in a society where I noticed that, especially this generation, without having enough data to say it, but just by observation, they are playing all the time, whether on their phones, whether it's constant addiction to play, even to games. So that raises a problem also in business context, or when we employ them, of how are they going to adjust to the traditional way of working, etc. So if we take their addiction, or let's say at least their interest in gaming, and we teach them to employ it in a context where they will learn something, where they will acquire a skill through gaming that's better than playing for the sake of playing. So, voilà. Thank you very much.